Okay, I gotta talk about this because this is a moment for humanity. And I'm talking about the explosive growth of this podcast called the Telepathy Tapes. It skyrocketed to being one of the biggest podcasts in the world so quickly. And there are some reasons behind this that are pretty profound. And I'm going to talk about why and how it got so big, those underlying factors behind it. So, the marketing psychology, something called the Overton window, and how it relates to humanity's spiritual awakening. So, this is a multi lens look. I'm looking at this from different perspectives, and I'll reveal these different perspectives to you about how this podcast, there's the artwork for it right there, is becoming a global phenomenon. This is exciting times, and this podcast is really capturing the cultural global zeitgeist of humanity in the most profound way. Okay, so what is it? The Telepathy Tapes is a podcast by Ky Dickens that explores the extraordinary telepathic abilities of non speaking individuals, particularly those with autism. It dives into both the personal stories and scientific research that supports this phenomena, and it's more common than most people think. The podcast invites listeners to reconsider the boundaries of communication and human potential, showcasing evidence and anecdotes that suggest telepathy might be a legitimate, albeit understudied phenomenon. Okay, so why is this important? Why? One, it forces everyone to reevaluate how we've judged nonverbal autistic people. A lot of people, because these children have trouble communicating and expressing, that people think they're not there or that they're way less intelligent than most people. And this reveals that it's quite the opposite. A lot of them have these extraordinary abilities, and there are so many profound implications with that. And it also invites us to question the boundaries of the mind and communication, obviously, because how can telepathy exist? And there are so many examples and so many stories, and there's actually so much research behind this stuff, telepathy and psi phenomena, but it's just been ignored because it contradicts the paradigm of scientific materialism, which is the paradigmatic worldview that we've been entrenched in for the last couple hundred or more years. And yeah, you got to listen to it because the stories are crazy. And there's no way that all of them are making it up. So I wrote here that it's either a ridiculously elaborate hoax. There's hundreds of, maybe even thousands of parents and teachers conspiring to, I don't know what the goal would be of that, or it's a genuinely transformational black swan event for the awakening of humanity. So a lot of these parents and teachers have these experiences where they're like, is this kid reading my mind? Because they'll feel like their thoughts, they'll sense thoughts that aren't theirs coming to them. And then they'll do little tests to validate it. They'll say, hey, I'm thinking of something random, tell me what I'm thinking. And the child will communicate in writing or however they can, and they will communicate that exact random word. So this is one way they've tested it, and there's so many more tests and experiments and things like that. A lot of research behind this. But a lot of these parents and teachers who have experienced this, they thought they were the only person in the world. And they didn't know who to tell or if people thought they would be crazy and all that. So they more and more started coming out with these stories. And then with that, of course, it gets researched more. And this podcast is like the catalyst for this movement, and it's a catalyst for things that are much greater as well. So it opens the door to investigating related psi, which is any kind of psychic and spiritual phenomena. It really opens the door for that. That's the amazing, profound implications of this. So let's get into how and why this podcast blew up. I'll share with you here 6 key factors that have driven its popularity. Number 1, it's the perfect balance of fringe. So what I mean by this is it's not just a boring, everyday, expected thing, but it's also not too out there that people don't believe it. It's got this good mix. of being very grounded in a lot of ways because so many personal stories and so much research behind this, but it's also so profound and fascinating. So it's that perfect balance of fringe to make it exciting and shareable. And people want to talk about it. So that relates to this concept called the Overton window. And the Overton window is the range of ideas the public is willing to consider and accept at any given time. So it's something that's maybe slightly outside of the collective Overton window. So the things that are right in the middle are going to be the boring and mundane stuff that everyone's like, okay, I knew that. But the things that are way too extreme, very few people, if any, are even going to believe it. So this is right. It's dancing on that edge of the Overton window, maybe a little outside of it. And that excitement drives the shareability of this. And two, there's also a spiritual awakening happening. If you've done any kind of spiritual work or things like that, inner work, personal development, you have a feel for this, especially if you've done it for years. You sense and you've noticed by relating to people, connecting with people, that there's something going on with a spiritual awakening. And this podcast, the Telepathy Tapes, taps into that in a fascinating and shareable way. It's like surfing that cultural zeitgeist of a spiritual awakening. I can really feel that. That's why I'm excited to talk about this. And number three, it leverages the power of storytelling. Storytelling is so engaging and it makes things shareable. This is why people can watch a movie for 2 hours or read 1,000 pages of a fantasy book while they can't read 2 paragraphs of regular text, because storytelling is one of those things that's like built into us as humans of how we relate and share things, even how we share information. And this podcast has a huge storytelling element to it. And that's a big factor that drives and has driven its success. Number four, it's research-based. There's so much research behind this stuff, telepathic ability, psi phenomenon, and it dives into this in a really thoughtful and concise way. It doesn't get too complicated, and it also doesn't oversimplify it. So it approaches the research behind this in an awesome way, in my opinion. So this research-based approach, it makes it more easily accepted by many people, because a lot of people won't believe things unless there's research behind it. So this adds credibility as well, and it creates a bridge. If this was just a woo-woo thing of people telling stories that seem so out there and unbelievable, and there's not really research to back it up, or it's not presented in a cohesive way, people would just dismiss it. So the research-based approach and how it's articulated in an cohesive way, in an easily understood way, that helps with its shareability. And number five, it's relatable. So there are personal stories, there's moments shared that we can all relate to. A really simple example is something that almost everyone that I've ever talked to has experienced this. They think of someone and then that person calls you. And I'm not talking about situations like your mom calls you every day and you think of your mom and she calls you. I'm talking about things like you don't think of a friend that you haven't even thought about or connected with in 5 years. And that person pops into your head and they call you or they text you or they like something of yours on social media 30 minutes later. I'm talking about something like that where it's statistically impossible, basically. And we've all experienced things like that. If you really look at your life with an open mind and keep yourself open to this, you'll notice that kind of phenomena happening. And these nonverbal children do a great job of tapping into that, because in a way they're forced to operate that way because they don't have the distractions of many of our senses the way that normal people do. So number six, it's also a focused topic. So the focused, cohesive, narrative-driven style of the podcast helped it build momentum. That focus creates momentum. So what are the implications of this? And this is the real juice right here. The implications are that the paradigm of scientific materialism is falling. That doesn't mean it's completely wrong either. It just means it's one part of the puzzle. It's not the whole thing. It can't explain everything. It's one part. And the notion that scientific materialism can explain everything, or there's only this material reality that we can measure with physical means, that whole notion is shattering with this. So this is like a harbinger for that dissolution, that paradigmatic dissolution. Another implication is that psi phenomena and metaphysical stuff are being widely accepted as real and legitimate. That's pretty interesting and pretty exciting. And there's a big spiritual awakening happening for humanity. I mentioned that before. It's true. It's happening. And the surprising catalyst for all of these are these nonverbal autistic children. And I really love that. I love that they are the unexpected harbingers of this movement. They're the unexpected harbingers of a huge awakening for humanity that is advancing and evolutionizing science and how we even view reality and how we're operating on a day-to-day basis. So that is profound. And I just want to acknowledge all of these children that have been doing this and contributing this way, because they are really amazing catalysts for all of this that we're talking about. And so many people judge them, dismiss them, ignored them. So that's pretty amazing. And the implications of this are awesome. If you haven't checked out the Telepathy Tapes, definitely give them a listen. I'm just about done with it. I have one episode left, and it's just blowing my mind. And I'm so excited to see what this does for humanity, because this has swept through our collective like wildfire. It jumped to becoming the top podcast in the world. I don't know if it's still sitting at that spot right now, but the last time I checked, it was. So there's something to this. And then you just saw the factors behind why this spread that way and gained so much momentum. All right, so like and subscribe and follow me for more.